Afghanistan is a land of forgotten ruins, endless dunes, and secrets buried beneath centuries of blood and war. The soldiers who fight there focus on the tangible threats: the Taliban, IEDs, snipers hiding in the distant ridges. But those who have spent long nights in the most desolate outposts will tell you there is something else lurking beyond the firelight. Something that does not belong to this world. The jinn, the whispering spirits of the desert. That's what the Afghan elders call them. Beings of smokeless fire, neither living nor dead, watching from the shadows. In the remote highlands where the wind carries voices and footprints appear without owners, the locals leave offerings of salt and prayers to ward them off. The Americans, of course, didn't believe in ghosts, at least not until they saw them. This is a smoke pit story, and these are the true military encounters with skinwalkers in the war-torn deserts of Afghanistan. December 2009. Staff Sergeant Mark Garrison had been in Afghanistan for nearly a year, stationed at Outpost Red Rock, a small isolated forward operating base, FOB, near the Pakistani border. It was a barren stretch of rock and dirt, surrounded by jagged ridgelines and endless desert. There were no cities out here, no real roads, just ancient footpaths winding through the hills like veins in dry flesh. The kind of place where an entire squad could go missing and no one would ever find them. That night, the desert was dead silent. No gunfire, no distant explosions, just the occasional gust of cold wind kicking dust over the walls. The men were gathered around the fire pit, swapping stories, playing cards, and trying to forget that they were sitting in one of the most dangerous regions in the world. Private Ellis, the youngest in the squad, leaned forward, warming his hands. "I swear, man, this place is cursed. The locals won't even come near it." Garrison smirked, taking a drag from his cigarette. "Yeah? And why's that?" "Talked to one of the Afghan National Army guys the other day," Ellis said, lowering his voice. "Said this whole valley is haunted. That their ancestors sealed something inside these mountains centuries ago, and we're the idiots that set up camp right on top of it." There were chuckles from the group. Corporal Diaz scoffed. "Yeah? And what? We're supposed to pack up and go home because some old man told you a bedtime story?" Ellis shrugged. "I'm just saying. Weird shit happens here, man. I hear stuff at night. Whispers, like real voices." "That's just the wind, kid," Garrison said, exhaling smoke. "You'll get used to it." Ellis nodded, but Garrison could see the unease in his eyes. He wasn't the only one. For the past several nights, strange things had been happening. The electronic equipment glitched out, radios cutting to static, thermal scopes picking up phantom heat signatures. The dogs at the Afghan checkpoint refused to go near certain parts of the perimeter, growling at nothing. And last night, one of their sentries swore he saw a figure standing just beyond the floodlights. When they went to check, there were no tracks in the dirt. Still, Garrison chalked it up to nerves. This place had a way of getting under your skin. But then, at exactly 0200 hours, the radio crackled to life. And everything changed. The voice on the other end was shaking, barely comprehensible. "Something's out there. It's watching us, moving, too fast, too quiet." Then, silence. Garrison stood up, his muscles instantly tight. "Who is this? Repeat. Over." No response. Ellis and Diaz exchanged nervous glances. What the hell was that? The call had come from Listening Post Echo, an observation site about 400 meters from the main base. 2 men were stationed there, armed with a radio and night vision equipment. Garrison didn't hesitate. "Grab your gear," he ordered. "We're going." Ellis and Diaz snapped into action, throwing on their gear and slinging their rifles. Within minutes, they were moving through the darkness, their boots crunching against the cold, hard-packed dirt. The outpost loomed in the distance, a small sandbagged bunker built into the hillside. The night was unnaturally quiet. No distant howls from wild dogs, no wind, nothing. Garrison's instincts screamed at him. Something wasn't right. They reached the bunker in complete silence. No movement, no sound. Ellis clicked on his flashlight, sweeping the entrance. Jesus! The place was empty. The two soldiers who had been stationed there were gone. Their rifles were stacked neatly against the sandbags, their gear untouched. A half-eaten MRE sat on the table. The radio, the same one that had called for help, was lying on the ground, still on. Diaz picked it up, checking the frequency. "Still set to our channel, no interference." Garrison felt a cold weight settle in his gut. "Then where the hell are they?" Ellis stepped outside, sweeping the area with his night vision goggles. Nods. His breath hitched. Sarge?" Garrison turned, his blood running cold. Ellis was frozen in place, staring into the darkness beyond the bunker. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I think I see something." Garrison took the nods from Ellis and raised them to his eyes. And that's when he saw it. About 50 meters away, standing just beyond the ridgeline, was a figure. At first, Garrison thought it was a man. But then, he noticed the way it stood. Too tall, its limbs too long, the joints bending the wrong way. Through the green haze of night vision, he saw pale, stretched skin, as if something had been wearing human flesh like a suit. The figure tilted its head, unnaturally slow, like a predator sizing up its prey. Then, in a voice that did not belong in this world, it spoke. "Leave!" The word didn't come from its mouth. It came from everywhere at once. A layered, broken distortion, like a radio transmission from hell. Then it moved. 1 second it was standing still. The next it lunged forward at inhuman speed. "Contact!" Garrison yelled, raising his rifle. Ellis screamed, "Contact!" Garrison didn't think, he just reacted. His finger squeezed the trigger, and the M4 bucked against his shoulder as 3 rounds cracked through the night. The creature twitched, the bullets hitting center mass. But it didn't fall. It stood there, body jerking from the impacts, as if momentarily surprised. Then, slowly, too slowly, it turned its head toward them, as if the bullets had been an inconvenience rather than a threat. The eyes, burning sickly yellow like a wolf's reflecting light, but worse. They glowed even through the green tint of the night vision. Then it moved again. Not like a man, not even like an animal. 1 second it was standing still. The next it was scuttling on all fours, its elongated limbs bending unnaturally, fingers digging into the hard-packed earth. It moved with horrifying speed, covering half the distance in the blink of an eye. Ellis screamed. He yelled, stumbling backward. "Fall back!" Garrison barked, shoving Ellis toward the bunker. Diaz, already dropping to a knee, fired his M4 on full auto, the muzzle flashing bright in the dark. The thing flinched, its body convulsing in jerky, unnatural movements, and then it laughed. Not a human laugh, not even an animal growl. A deep, rasping vibration that crawled through their bones, like multiple voices layered on top of each other. Then it lunged. Garrison fired again, this time aiming for the head, but the creature twisted mid-air, dodging the shot like it had anticipated it. It landed on all fours, inches from Diaz, its grotesque mouth curling open in an impossible grin. Diaz barely had time to react. Garrison did the only thing he could. He grabbed Diaz by the vest and yanked him back inside the bunker. "Move! Move! Move!" Ellis had already made it to the rear entrance, shaking like a leaf, rifle clutched so tight his knuckles were white. They barreled inside, slamming the door shut. And then, silence. For a moment, nothing moved. The only sound was their own ragged breathing, the rapid-fire pounding of their hearts. Garrison's hands trembled as he reloaded his mag, sweat dripping from his forehead despite the bitter cold. "What the f*** was that?" Diaz panted. Ellis looked like he was about to vomit. Garrison didn't answer. He didn't have one. Then the scratching began. Slow, deliberate. A single clawed hand dragging across the steel door. A voice whispered through the cracks, so close it might as well have been inside the room with them. "We see you," Ellis sobbed. Diaz's grip tightened around his rifle. Garrison's blood turned to ice. And then, the whispers spread. From the roof, from the vents, from the walls. Hundreds of voices, speaking, laughing, waiting. They had no choice. They couldn't stay here. Garrison gave a single order. "Grenade! On my mark!" Diaz, hands shaking, pulled the pin on a frag and held it tight. 3, 2, 1. He yanked the door open and threw. The grenade bounced against the dirt, landing right at the creature's feet. For the first time, it reacted with something close to fear, eyes widening, body twisting away. Then, boom! The explosion lit up the night, sending up a spray of dirt and rock. They didn't look back. They ran. By the time they reached the main outpost, they were barely breathing. Soldiers turned, confused, weapons raised. The commander, a grizzled lieutenant, took one look at their faces and knew something was very, very wrong. What happened? Garrison couldn't explain it. What could he say? That something unnatural had just tried to hunt them down? That a thing that shouldn't exist was stalking them in the dark? The lieutenant stared at him, waiting. Garrison just shook his head. "We lost them," he said finally, voice hoarse. "The men at the listening post. They're gone." The lieutenant's face darkened. No questions were asked. No reports were filed. Just silence. The outpost was abandoned a week later. No official explanation. Only whispers. Garrison never spoke of what happened again. Years later, when he was back home, he'd wake up in a cold sweat, remembering those yellow eyes watching from the darkness. Some nights, if he listened closely, he swore he could still hear it. That laughter, deep and layered, like it had never truly left, like it was still watching, waiting, and he knew, deep down, it wasn't over. Not yet. The sun rose over Outpost Red Rock, washing the barren landscape in pale light. But the warmth of morning did nothing to ease the cold knot in Garrison's stomach. No one spoke of what had happened. Diaz and Ellis were silent, their faces hollow, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. They had spent the remainder of the night huddled in their bunks, rifles close, waiting for something, anything, to come for them. But nothing did. Still, the silence felt wrong. The desert should be alive with the sounds of distant howls, the chirping of insects, the rustling wind through the hills. But instead, it was as if the land itself was holding its breath. Garrison knew what had to happen next. They needed to go back. At 0600 hours, a squad of 8 soldiers, including Garrison, Diaz, and Ellis, was assembled. The official mission: to retrieve the missing men from Listening Post Echo. Unofficially, Garrison wasn't sure what they were looking for. They arrived at the bunker in a single-file formation, moving cautiously, scanning the terrain. Everything was exactly as they had left it the night before. The radio, the half-eaten meal, the stacked rifles. But the air was thick, heavy, like walking into a place that had been abandoned for centuries, despite only hours passing. "Where the hell did they go?" muttered Sergeant Willis, the squad leader. Diaz knelt by the radio. "Still active," he said, running his fingers over the frequency dial. "But no sign of interference." Ellis, gripping his rifle so hard his hands shook, whispered, "We need to go." Then one of the men, Private Langston, pointed. "Tracks," he said. And there they were, a set of human footprints leading away from the bunker, heading straight into the desert. Only something was wrong. They started normal, but after a few meters, the stride became erratic, longer, deeper. Then, they weren't human anymore. The indentations became clawed, elongated, as if the missing soldiers had begun running on all fours, and then they vanished. The tracks ended abruptly, as if whatever had made them had simply disappeared into thin air. Garrison's stomach twisted. There was no sign of struggle, no drag marks, no blood, just nothing. When they returned to base, the local Afghan interpreter, Haroon, was waiting. He had heard the whispers. "You went looking, didn't you?" he said, eyes dark with something between fear and disappointment. Garrison didn't answer. Haroon sighed, shaking his head. "I told you, some things in this land do not want to be found." The lieutenant, overhearing, snapped. "Enough of this superstitious bullshit," he barked. "If you have something useful to say, say it." Haroon hesitated. Then, in a hushed voice, he spoke. "My grandfather told me stories of these beings," he said. "Creatures that walk between the worlds. They can look like men. They can sound like men. But they are not men." Garrison felt his throat tighten. Haroon continued. "They live in the old places. The places where the wind never stops, where even the wolves will not go." He gestured toward the mountains beyond the outpost. "They hunt those who see them, those who do not look away." A long pause. "Did you look away?" Garrison said nothing. Later that evening, Garrison was called to command. The lieutenant's expression was grim. "The official report," he said, voice firm, "states that the men from Listening Post Echo were lost due to desertion." Garrison felt his stomach drop. "What? You heard me. Desertion." Garrison clenched his fists. "That's bullshit. Those men didn't run." The lieutenant's eyes locked onto his. "Are you sure?" Garrison opened his mouth, then closed it. Because the truth was, he wasn't sure of anything anymore. And maybe that was the point. Garrison transferred out of Outpost Red Rock 2 weeks later. He never spoke of it again. But some nights, in the years that followed, he'd wake up in a cold sweat, hearing that same inhuman laughter ringing in his ears. And once, just once, he swore he saw something watching him from the tree line behind his house. Too tall, too still, glowing yellow eyes. And then, it was gone. Just like the men from Listening Post Echo, just like the truth. Some things in this world do not want to be found, and some things never really leave. Thank you for watching Paranormal War Story, soldier. Subscribe for more strange military encounters and comment how long you served and where.